Hey, Ron here. Today I want to talk about the book by Olsen, the Lean Product Playbook. I'm going to do a quick summary of what are the main topics and concepts that are covered in this book, and I will do a review in the end where I give my opinion about the book. First, let's talk about Olsen. As he puts it in his YouTube channel, he's a product management trainer, consultant, author, and a speaker. He obviously has a YouTube channel, which I'm going to link in the description down below, as well as his website. And there you can see that he's an expert consultant, expert in product management. He has already published books, like obviously this one, and a speaker and so on. So go check him out because he's really, really, really good. And that probably already tells you a little bit about what is going to be my opinion about the book. But let's dive into it. So before I start talking about my key takeouts, let me know in the comments below. Have you read the book? What is the most interesting thing that you found out from the Lean Product Playbook by Olsen? So the first thing to talk about in this Lean Product Playbook book by Olsen is that he's quite inspired by the Lean Startup book by Ries. And you can see that both are very aligned in their points of view that they have about Lean and Lean ways of working, and also in the ways that they talk and discuss and promote methods like MVPs or building MVPs and actually building and learning as you go together with your customers and not try to build the perfect product. So what I'm going to talk about are my main takeouts from this book. And let's start with the first one. So my first takeout is that he covers really well the topic of why products fail. He introduced one of the probably most important graphs out there about product management, except if you take maybe this one of the where the position of a product manager is between business, technology, and design. He introduced the product market fit pyramid. This pyramid you probably have seen out there, and if not, you have heard the term product market fit. And if we talk for a moment about this product market fit pyramid, it's a very important and interesting concept that he developed. Basically, he divided a pyramid in two parts. One that is talking more about the business and the other one that is talking more about the product. Or you could say the market or the problem, and then the other one, the product. You can call it different ways. The first part, the one that talks about the market, is talking about that out there in the world, there are people that have a problem or a need. Here, he divides this area in two parts. First of all, the target customers, and second, the need that it's out there. And once you have identified this market need and the customers that are having this need, then he's defining what is the product, the solution, the way to solve the problem that you have for your customers. And here he distinguishes three main parts. First of all is the value proposition that you're offering. So how are you making the world a better place? How are you helping people maybe improve their health or their fitness or whatnot? Then on top of that, there's a layer that is defining what are the feature sets of this value proposition. So what are the features that you are going to define that are actually going to tackle the problems that those customers have and bring that value to them. And finally, you're going to have the UX, so the design of the product. Very, very important part, obviously. You have to make sure that the experience that the customers have is a good one. Because one of the problems, big problems that you're going to have is retention. One of the first things that you always had to hit, and probably one of the problems that you always will have, is you had to keep retaining your customers. You had to keep your customers happy so they are not even thinking about moving to other apps or products, whatnot. So once you have defined these two areas, the market part and the product part, you will have a gap. And this is what he describes as the product market fit gap or product market fit. If you're not able to find the way of bridging that gap, you have not found product market fit, which means that your product is disconnected from the market. But in the moment that you find your product market fit, those two align, those two close the gap, and then you actually have a product that is tackling that market need. This is a brilliant way of putting or mixing the world of business or the market need out there with the product that you're building. So if we break down now per parts, one of the first things, obviously, that he starts talking about are the target personas, the user personas, target customers that you will have out there, and understand them really well. And understand that you are never going to solve a problem for all the people out there, even if they are within your target persona. So if you think about product managers, even if I do an app for product managers, not all the product managers are going to benefit from it. Maybe because I don't support all the different operating systems for phones out there. Maybe because it's restricted to some languages. Maybe because certain product managers just don't use their phones for work. It's just what it is. So it doesn't matter what product you're building. You're never going to build it for everybody. Understanding who is your target persona, not just a generic persona of a product manager, but really which type of product manager you will be serving. That is going to help you understand your customers, your users much better and understand them better when you are building the solutions for them. Also, you have to understand really well if those are B2B customers or B2C customers. They have different workflows and they have different ways of making decisions. If I work with a business to business, B2B, usually I don't necessarily have to talk with the end user. I might not even talking with the product managers. I might be talking with a product leader or even with a CFO, and that will be the one that makes the decision of purchasing the product. That is my customer. My users are the product managers. Or you have a buyer persona, you call it that way as well. In the case of B2C, then I will be selling directly to product managers. So for example, if me as a YouTube channel of sales service to product managers, I would do a B2C because it's a business to consumer. Product managers in that case will be directly the consumers and they could make the purchase decision. The important thing there, who makes the purchase decision? In the B2B is usually not the user. In the B2C is typically always the user. Except if you are having a product for kids. Usually in those cases, parents or tutors are going to be the ones making the decision. The next one he covers obviously are customer needs. It's obviously following a little bit the product market fit pyramid. Here he talks that many people can talk about different concepts like needs, problems, wants, and benefits. And I had to agree that I tend to talk more about problems necessarily than needs, probably because I have been working mainly in B2B and there is usually a problem that the company has that you want to fix or that you want to solve. And it's maybe not necessarily a need from a user. You can consider that if a need is a must need or not, or is it a nice to have. Then there's others that talk about wants or benefits. And again, you can say how important those are. But I understand that he chooses to talk about needs because of course you can say that a need is a must to have need. And then you can consider that basically that's the same as a problem. At least in my playbook. And of course, different products are going to address different types of needs. And he covers this there. And it's very important to understand that what type of need are you covering? Is this a must-have need? Is this a real problem that if you don't solve it, users might not even have a solution? Or the workaround is so maybe painful or maybe old school that there's no real product that is solving it properly? Okay, maybe pen and paper can still be solving quite many problems out there. But you might come up with a more streamlined and more efficient way of solving those problems. This is very important to identify. The other one is that the need is not really that important and it's a nice to have. It's maybe something like a fitness app, which usually for many people is more of a nice to have than necessarily a must have need. Especially if you're talking about the wider audience. There might be a niche audience for them, might be for professionals, might be a must have. But for the rest of the people, this might be a nice to have. So you have to understand really well what is your position. And it's not your position. It's how the users understand your position. Because that's what is going to define your position. You might want to be in one place, but the reality is that the users are going to tell you where you are. And of course, you can work with the users to move your product from a nice to have to a must have. And that's a different story. But you have to understand better with the customers what is that you have to offer with your product that is going to turn the product into that direction of being a must-have and not just a nice-to-have. And of course, while you are talking with your users, while you're trying to identify that need, it's very important that you identify what is the most important need that they have around the vision and the product that you want to build. This is very important because if you concentrate on just the nice-to-have sentence and not concentrate on solving the problem itself, and you focus more on the other areas, it might be that you're just building that nice to have product, but not the product that they actually need. And you might not be replacing, for example, a potential competitor out there. Another part that he talks about are ways to prioritize your work. And I think that he talks about this when he's talking about customer needs, how to prioritize them. But I think that it's very important to talk about this separately because he covers quite many of the frameworks that are out there. And he talks about a framework that he created himself, importance versus satisfaction. And he also talks about other models like the Kano model, for example. I think that this is important. It's important to have a way to prioritize your work. And it's important that you are able to identify what are the features or the needs that the customers have that are going to bring the most satisfaction or the most value to your customers. This is really, really key. And it's very important because this is the way that you promote retention. The way that you promote retention is basically how you're building your business. Because if you have people that want to stay with you, most likely those are going to be people that are willing to pay for your products. The next big takeout for me has been the defining your value proposition. Obviously, that's very important. And if you are in product management, you probably have heard about it, but I think it's very good how he covers it and the ways that he talks about what are the different methods that you can use to define your value proposition. So that this is very important. And I think that it's also very important that he covers as well what is the key differentiation between you and your competitors. There's going to be competitors. It can be pen and paper. It can be whatnot. It can be many things. What is your competitors? Your competitors are going to have an offer and yours is going to be slightly different. What are the differences between that offer? How can you focus on your strengths and not focus on how you're trying to reach out to those competitors, how you're kind of trying to leverage maybe some of the offering that they have, but how does your offering is better than your competitors. Focusing on what would be like your unique selling propositions or key selling propositions, so USPs or KSPs, in the ways that what is that I offer that is different to my competitors, or what is that I offer that my competitors have, but my offer is way better. So this is very important, and understanding your position and understand your weaknesses also, that's going to be very important because you are going to have to leverage those ones. My next key takeouts come with the defining your feature set. I think that here is where the book gets very similar to the Lean Startup by Ries. I think that it's still really good, but it's talking a lot about what is to build an MVP and the different types of MVPs. So basically, it's also talking a lot about how to build the feature sets, how to define the features, and how to actually validate this with your customers. This doesn't mean that you're actually building features all the time. Sometimes you will build just prototypes or mock-ups. Those can be websites. It can be just a sign up. Are you interested in my value proposition? Sign me up for it. Or showing a mock-up of how this is going to work and let the users give their opinion. Or build a mock-up in something like Figma, where people actually feel like they're playing with your product when there's in reality no product behind the scenes. It's just a clever prototype that actually behaves as the product should behave in the future. He also talks about how to define user stories and, of course, how to work collaboratively with the rest of your team. You are not as a product manager just a one team person. You belong to your product team. You belong to your product squad, whatever you call it. You work with your probably designer, with your tech lead, and a set of engineers. This is your team. You had to work with them. You had to plan with them. You had to define the stories with them and understand what are the limitations, what are the potential, the possibilities, and so on. Of course, you had to test and validate all your ideas with different types of MVPs. Again, going back to the topic of the MVPs. And here he talks about that there's two types of MVPs, like a product MVP and a marketing MVP. He thinks that, of course, they relate to the two aspects of the pyramid. So there are MVPs that are going to be to test your product. There are going to be MVPs that are going to be to test and validate your market. So your user personas and your problem or the need that you are trying to solve. The next key takeout are around the design. So the first one is that design is something that is still often overlooked, especially in B2B products. Not quite so in B2C products because retention is so important in those products. Of course, retention is very important in B2B products, but retention with B2B products sometimes is easier to maintain because there's longer contracts and the persons or the users are not necessarily the decision makers. And the decision makers might be just thinking about money and not necessarily about how good or how well the product is actually serving their needs. Although this is something that is changing, and some B2B companies are focusing much more in design nowadays than they used to. But there is still a big gap, and there's still a big opportunity for B2B products to actually nail their designs, because your design can kill your product. It really can. Just think about, for example, Apple, how they have in the past, maybe not quite so recently, maybe they're not in their maybe brightest years of the designs anymore as they used to be, but many of the competitors have been able to catch up. If you think in the past, the experiences with Macs, with iPhones, with any products from Apple were just completely in a different level than they were with other products. Just think Windows. Okay, those products nowadays, they have had the time to catch up, but there's many markets and there are many businesses out there, many products that they don't have that kind of experience. And if you don't have a good experience, the problem is that it might be that your product delivers the value proposition for the users. But because the design is not good, the users never get that value out of your product because they get confused. And you don't want your users to be confused when they use your product. So focus on your design. Make finding your value proposition really easy for your users, especially for those first users and those first experiences, because that's what they're going to remember. Users that come to try your product and they don't find any value with it, most likely are never coming back. And of course, you have to also make sure that just you don't focus on the finding the value, but how can you make the experience with your product actually delightful, that people enjoy using your product? Okay, most of us, we don't build games, but you can say that games is something that is relatively addictive, that people like to continue playing with them, but other products have achieved the same. You can think about YouTube. Many people come back every day to use YouTube. That's because probably they like the experience they have. The same goes with TikTok and other social media products. So there are ways for products that are no games that they can focus and keep retention levels really high. Of course, you don't want to create addictions to your users. That's a very big no-no, at least in my book. But you want that people are really enjoying using your product and that the experience is not a painful one and not a difficult one either. Another key takeout of the Lean Product Playbook is that you have to focus on iterating and pivoting when needed. Again, this is very similar to the Lean Startup book by Ries. You make sure that you understand which ones are good ones, and those ones, then you continue and reinforce and move forward. And if the product or the feature that you want to build is actually not finding the right fit, it might be because of what I talked earlier. Design might not be great, but maybe you are actually being able to solve that problem. It's like, okay, how can I pivot to change my design to actually make the experience much better so the users can actually get that value? It might be that you had the wrong value proposition, then you actually had to change. Or it might be that you have the wrong user customers, then you had to pivot. It might be that your product is actually solving a problem for other customers. One of the examples that I typically put, there is a skateboards manufacturer called Carver that actually was building those skateboards and promoting them towards skateboarders. But skateboarders were not interested in them because they behave very differently and they feel more like a surfboard. When they changed the target personas and they changed the target marketing to the surfers, actually then they pick up much faster and they got traction and actually they were able to find product market fit. This is how you had to pivot sometimes your story, sometimes you had to pivot your features, sometimes your value proposition, whatnot. You had to understand how the behavior is, how people are actually adopting your product or not, and then try to modify when needed. So in summary, try to adopt the build, measure, learn approach. Another key takeout that I took here from this book is that he's also going into ways of working within the teams, like product teams, teams with engineers, and their cross-functional teams, whatever you call them. And then here he talks about different Agile methodologies. I'm not going to go through them. I have a video. If you're interested, I will link it up here. But he also describes like Scrum and Kanban and what are the benefits of these different methods, and just basically recommending that if you're building tech products, this is probably the best approach, because many of the lean startup mindset and principles are very similar to those ones of Agile. Another key takeout that I take from this book is also that he talks a lot about analytics, understanding the behavior of your users, understanding how they're using your product. And here he promotes of using different metrics like the R metrics, so acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. And then also he recommends to use for optimization things like A/B testing, where you are actually changing smaller parts of your product to see the behavior of the users. And are these promoting growth within the user base? This growth can mean many things, mean more usage of the product, it can mean more revenue, more sales, or it can mean more retention, satisfaction, and so on. So now let's move to my thoughts about the book. I think that this is a great book. As a playbook is great. It's just, if you are a product manager, probably this is something that I would say that you should read. It's a very interesting read, first of all, but it's also very practical on all the different topics that it's covering. Maybe one of the things that I might not quite agree is that he focuses a lot on the design side, to the point that it sounds like design and UX, it has to be defined by the product manager, or is kind of owned by the product manager. And I think that the design is owned by the product designer. That's my feeling. For me, the product manager, the product designer are like equals, that they had to work together, the same as the tech lead. This is like a core team from the cross-functional team or the product team, the squad, that are actually the ones that are going to build that product. And they have different aspects that they own, that they actually had to prioritize, and that is part of their work, but they still had to work together to build this solution. And it's non-responsibility of either of them to define the perfect product on their own. They had to do this together as a collaborative or cross-functional team. So maybe that's a little bit like potentially confusing, that it could sound to some people, and I don't think that that's what he's going for. But I think that to some people, it could sound like the design belongs to the product managers, which for me usually is not the case. But it can be realistically in some small companies and small teams. So I've seen it, for example, in smaller startups and smaller companies where there might be no budget, and the first people that they recruit are the product managers. Product designers might come down the line. One of the things that I really enjoy from the book is that he has an example project that he actually ran through following these methods. And this is very important. I think that is good for people and good for you as a product manager to see that people or somebody has used these ways of working in practice, and this has worked for them. So he, for example, talks about how he did discovery, how he did validation with the customers, how he did then just interviews with customers, how he shared mock-ups and prototypes and get feedback from them. So basically, he's telling you how he did this journey of a collaborative or iterative way of working together with the customers to try to identify from the actual problem to the personas, to what is the value proposition, to what are the features that we are going to build, and what is going to be the experience of this product. And actually doing this in an iterative way together with the users. Obviously, you don't do this in one step. You have to do this step by step, and you have to get more and more understanding over the interviews that you're going to do. Typically with those first customers, you're going to have quite many interviews until you actually are able to have a clear understanding of what your product is going to be. And also he talks about it a lot, that you can do these things without coding, that you can do these things just by using clever mockups and clever prototypes, that you don't have to spend weeks to develop a prototype. You can develop those things relatively fast in kind of mock-up websites, or sign up to potential, give me feedback, or sign up for a potential product that's coming in the future, like an announcement and so on. So there's different ways of doing these prototypes and mock-ups that are not going to require coding. And I think that this is something that is very important that he covers on the book. And it's something that not necessarily everybody understands. And for many people, an MVP is pretty much close to a perfect product. And that's not the reality of what a MVP is. The MVP is the tool that you're using in this iterative work when you're trying to discover what you're going to build and what the customer's needs are. So one of my maybe comments about the product market fit pyramid is that typically I start with the problem and not with the target customers. I usually identify a problem, and then as I go working more with the problem, I refine better who the target customers are, instead of finding first the target customers and then define the problem. That's at least my thought process. I'm not saying that what he promotes or what he talks in the pyramid is wrong. It's just not how I work. At least for me, it doesn't work that well that way. I think that the introduction of the product market fit pyramid is probably one of the best ones out there for product management, business management, whatnot, whatever you want to call it, marketing as well. It's really important to have this visualized so people can understand quite well what is that you're trying to build, who are you trying to target, what is the problem that you have identified, what is the value proposition, and what will be the feature set and the user experience that you will have for your users. This is very important, and I think it's a great way of visualizing it. One of the things that I noticed is that when it comes to frameworks, I like the framework that he introduced himself, this importance versus satisfaction. I tend to use a different one, this effort versus value, that helps you understanding the value that you're giving to your customers versus the effort that is going to cost me to actually deliver this value. And for me, this is also something very important because sometimes the time to market to build that feature or bring that value to the customer is really important, and it's something that it will affect the decision making for me. That's from my point of view. So usually I use more that other framework instead of something like Kano model or the importance versus satisfaction or Ries frameworks. And also I find that value versus effort is probably one of the simplest ones to implement, something that it is easier. When something is easy to implement, it's easy that people stick to it. I think when he talks about MVPs, he talks about the MVPs for the product and the market. I understand why he does it because of it aligns really well then with the pyramid that he has built. But I think that from my point of view is how you are building these ones is that at least I tend to talk about validating your problem and validating your solution. That's usually how I focus it more. And validating the problem is more like the actual problem, and then validating the solution would be validating the actual product. Probably you could consider that validating the user personas falls more in the validating the problem because you are testing with different personas, and there you identify that, hey, these user personas or this type of product managers, for example, a B2C product manager might not be the focus group for my product because I'm just focusing on B2B. If you're still watching, thank you very much. Please like and subscribe. It helps a lot. And if you like this video, you're probably going to also enjoy the review that I did for the Lean Startup by Ries. Go check it out here. I will see you in the next one. And remember, stay safe.